Hello my gorgeous friends on the internet, welcome once again to another exciting tutorial. So today we'll be looking at something awesome. So basically I just came up with this idea of creating a video. Basically it's going to be in form of a series, sure, but it won't be long. So I will be talking about the various storage you can use in your Flutter applications, like the various ways you can store data in your Flutter application. So in Flutter, we basically, or in mobile development, there are various ways whereby you can store or persist data. One is by using maybe a dedicated server, and one is by maybe using a local database, or you can use SQLite. Like when I mean server, I mean like Firebase. You can use Firebase, or you write your own back-end code to actually store your data in the server. So you can use Firebase, you can use your server, you can use SQLite. So SQLite basically stores your data like in the user's device. So whenever the user lost or loses their device, they won't be able to recover those data except you sync them to Firebase or to your server. So that way you can fetch the data whenever the user logs in again. Okay, another way again is by storing your data in form of JSON in the user's device. So it still works the same way as the SQLite, but this one you are storing them in form of JSON and also fetching them in form of JSON. Okay, so actually there is a package for that which I'll be looking on, which I'll be treating later on as we progress. And again, we also have a way like you can use map too to store data. It depends on the data you're storing. So using map to store your data is not like it's not going to save it, but once you refresh the app or you close the app and come back again, those data is gone completely. So another way again to store simple data is using the shared preference, and that is what we'll be looking at in this very tutorial. So basically, the shared preference is normally used to store key value data on the disk. It also stores on your device. So the only way you can lose a shared preference data is when you clear your cache, like the cache for that app, or you lose your device. So that's when you just lose all your data. But as long as you don't clear your cache, you didn't uninstall your app, you didn't lose your device, your data will still be there. So that's what we'll be looking at. So basically, if you are coming from the Android, you should know about shared preference. Okay, so Flutter doesn't have this built-in shared preference just like Android, and for iOS we have the NSUserDefaults. Okay, but there is a plugin for doing that. So that this plugin just provides it helps us like persist the data in key value pair. And so this shared preference plugin, it wraps the NSUserDefaults on iOS and the shared preference on Android, providing a persistent store for simple data. So and that plugin is the shared preference. Okay, so I've added the shared preference dependency, so I've depended on it. And this I just decide I'm not putting the version because we are going to use the current version by default. But if you want to specify a version, no problem, we can do that real quick. But I do like doing it like this for tutorials. But if you are deploying maybe a real like a production app, it's always good you declare the sorry you declare the version you are using. So let's go with the version. So it's 12 points, okay, plus 4. All right. Okay, so okay, sorry, this should be dots. Alright, so I'm going to run Flutter pop get real quick. So while this is running, let's look at what we'll be covering in this very video. So the first thing is to add a dependency, which is what I just did here, and now the is running Flutter pop get for us. So I'm going to show us how to save data using the shared preference. I'm also going to show us how to read data and also show us how to remove data from the shared preference. And finally, I'm going to show us the supported types that the shared preference supports. Okay. So first thing first, let's go to persist data. We use the setter method provided by the shared preference class. Setter methods are available for various primitive types such as the setInt, the setBool, and setString. Basically, if we want to save data, okay. We also have the read data. So to read data, we use the appropriate getter method provided by the SharedPreference class. For each setter, there is a corresponding getter. For example, you can use the getInt, getBool, and getString method to fetch data from the SharedPreference. We also have a way of deleting data just by using the remove method. So then we specify the key, then it's going to delete the value for us. Okay, so but before I dive into the example, let me just give you some supported types that this SharedPreference supports. Sorry, this video is getting longer, but I just want to explain some things so that you are going to just like grab the context. Okay, so this storage is easy and convenient to use, but it has some limitations. And what are those limitations? I'm going to be giving you two limitations. The first limitation is not designed to store a large or a lot of data. Okay, it's just basically for storing a key value pair. Like let's say you want to store the full name of the user in the device, and when the person logs in, opens your device, you want to fetch that name. So you store them in the SharedPreference. Okay, so this type of data, I won't really, since it's not something you want to like persist across devices, so I won't really advise you use Firebase for a simple small data like this. You just use your SharedPreference to store those data. So again, another point is only primitive types can be used with the SharedPreference. Remember I told you that while saving or reading data, we use the methods setInt, setBool, setString, getBool, getInt. Okay, so in SharedPreference we have some basic types which are int, double, bool, string, and string list. So those are the types that are supported by the SharedPreference. Okay, so now let me give you a real quick example of how to use the SharedPreference to store a data. Basically, I believe we'll be using this. Okay, yeah, this is basic counter app. So you can see this basic counter app. Whenever you create an app, this is what you get. So let's say I increment this and then I do a hot restart. You will see that this data is going to start from 0. This counter is going to refresh back to 0. Okay, okay, you see now it has gone back to 0. That is because the data are not persisting. So to actually persist this data, I'll be using the SharedPreference. So everything, for simplicity and for good understanding, I'll be doing everything in just one class. Okay, so I'm not going to create any other that class. Everything will be here. So let me just remove all these comments real quick. If you want to join me to remove it, if you're on Windows, I believe you press Control F, but if it's for iOS, just Command F, sorry. So once you press that, you press your / dots, yeah, and asterisk. So once you do that, you click on use regular expression. So just click here and it's going to highlight everything. So you click on this arrow down. So here just leave it empty because we want to replace all this stuff with an empty string. So once that is done, you click on this replace all and everything will be gone. Alright, so you can close this. So you should know how to format your code properly. I do use a short command which is Ctrl+Shift+I or Command+Shift+I, but for this let me just go here and click on format document. Alright, so now you see all those comments are gone. So I'm going to remove this. Okay, just close this so that we get more space, and also open this so that we get more space as well. So the first thing we'll be doing is to store our data. Alright, so I'm going to show you how to save these data whenever the user increments the counter. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to create a function. So here we have a function which is actually incrementing the counter. So I'm still going to work with that. Okay, so I'll remove this void. I don't know why I'm removing it, but I'm going to remove it. So I'll use an async keyword because basically this SharedPreference works asynchronously because we don't know when the data are going to return. It's something we are storing, so we don't know when it's going to return. So it's better you use an async keyword, and again is also a plugin, so it's communicating with the platform channel. So it's better you use async and then run this. So now I'm going to use the SharedPreference. remember I've already added the plugin, so don't worry, it's already dependent. I've already added the plugin in my dependency. So I will go here real quick and create a shared preference. Okay, I can just create it here. So basically the shared preference, I will create an instance of the shared preference, sorry. So it's going to be shared preference. Okay, so you see automatically it will be imported for us. So once you do that, real quick, we give it a name. So this is going to be prefs. Okay, and I basically cannot use await here, so it's best. I do have a way of running this stuff, like creating a separate class, but let me just do everything here. So what I'll do now is just to create a shared preference inside this class. So for each function, I'm going to create two functions, three functions, one for deleting, one for saving, and one for reading. But inside, I'm going to declare the instance of the shared preference, okay, for just understanding it. Okay, so this is the name of the shared preference, and then I will go await. So I'm allowed to use this await keyword because we have the async keyword in our function. So now I will now initialize this. So shared preference dot instance get instance. Alright, so now we have created an instance of the shared preference. So now what I'm going to do now is to actually increment this counter by 1. Okay, but what I'll do first before I increment it, I want to actually save that counter, okay, which is this counter. So I'll call set state. So this is like saving the current counter. So let's say we increment the counter to 2 or 1, so we should just save the current counter value. Okay, so I'll be using the name, which is preferences dot, so use the, since it's an integer, okay, so the counter is an integer. Assuming it's a string, we can use a string. If it's a double, we can use a double. So you can see the 4 primitive types it supports: set bool, double, set int, string, and this. So I'll be using the set int. And remember I told you is a key value pair, so you need a key and also a value. Basically you use the key to read the value, just like a JSON file. For you to access the value, you have to get the key first, and once you call the key, you'll be able to access the value. Okay, so I'll give this a key of counter key real quick. Alright, so the value is basically what I want to store inside the shared preference, and the thing I want to store is the counter value. Okay, so just give it counter real quick and close this up. So now if I run this stuff, actually you can see that this thing will be saved. Alright, so let me just Control S this. Okay, so if I run this stuff will be saved. Yeah, it's going to save while it's incrementing, but right now I can't read the data. I don't even know if it's incrementing. Okay, so now I'm going to create, don't worry, this function is actually being called here. You can see this floating action button, increment counter, so it's actually being called here. So next thing what I'm going to do is to create a function that is going to read the current value from the shared preference. Okay, so I'm going to create a function real quick. So read counter. So this is a function, and I'm also going to use the async keyword because I'm also going to initialize the shared preference inside. Okay, the reason why I'm doing this is for you to actually understand what I'm doing. You should also use the same name because you are storing the values in the same shared preference. So you must use the same name. If not, you won't be able to get access to this key. Maybe when you can use a different name is if you want to create multiple shared preferences that handles different things, then you can just create a separate name. But in this case, I'm using the same shared preference. Okay, so I'll use the preference or await and shared preference. So I'm going to create the instance of it. Alright, so now what I'm going to do now, whenever we do a hot restart, I want this value to remain as 8. Okay, so what I'm going to do is first of all get this counter key, and then once I get it, I'll now set the value to this counter, and then finally I'll call it on init state. So whenever we initialize our app, boom, we get the data and then update this widget, this counter widget. because you can see now currently this data is stored, like we have 8 now inside the shared preference. But if I do a hot restart, it's just going to start from 0. So that's what we're going to fix. So we want the value to start from the last default counter. So now I'm going to use the set state. Yeah, so I'm going to use the set state because I want to rebuild the widget. All right, I'm going to rebuild the widget. So I'll use the set state, and don't worry, in my next videos that I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to use a kind of state management to actually handle your state instead of using set states to rebuild your widget every time, because calling a rebuild in a widget is very expensive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually trying to load the counter. So I will store this in a pref. So this is the name, sorry, preference dot get int is an integer. So I use setInt to store it. So I also need to use getInt to get it the key. So I only need the key in this case. I don't need any value because I'm trying to get it. Alright, so now I'll use the name. Make sure the name is the same. If not, you won't receive any data from it. So once that is done, okay, so and I close it. But what about if this shared preference is null? Yeah, what about if it's null? We cannot set null to this counter now. It's not good. So what I'll do, I'll use a method that is provided for us. So if it's null, so I'll say 0. Yeah. So if it's null, then return 0. That is, if it's null, we are going to set this counter to 0 by default. That means we are opening, like we just opened the app for the first time. Alright, but now if I do a hot restart, this will still not work. Okay. To fix this, what I'm going to do, I'll go to my init stage. Remember, the init method is only called once. So that's where we're going to initialize this read counter function. Okay. So I will go here. Okay, let's say, yeah. I'm going to do it here. So initialize and update counter if available. Yeah, so if it's available, I update it, as we can just leave it to be 0, which is what we declared here. So I will use the init. All right, we have init. Okay, this is not coming. Let me see, minimize, and let's go back again. All right, so don't worry, this, I know my system sometimes actually does this. I don't know why the init don't want to show, but okay, no issues. I still know how to go about it. So I will just use my override method. So since it wants to prove stubborn, so in your case it might work. Just press your init, it should work. So I'm going to use mine. So it's basically going to be void init state. Yeah, I believe. Yeah. Okay, so we have the super dot init state. All right, so this is where I'm going to call this very function, which is read counter. Okay, so I'm going to call it here, copy this and paste it here. All right, okay, it's a function. So let's format this code. Okay, so all right, so now we have it. We have our init states where we update the counter if it's available, and then here this one is basically used to add a counter to shared preference, and this other one is used to read counter. All right, so now let's see what we got. So I'm going to do a hot restart. First let me save it. Okay, so once that is saved, let's do a hot restart. Remember, the last value before I did a hot restart on this was 8. So let's see if the value is going to change to 8. All right, if it's going to work, let's see. Hot restart. All right, we got it. Now it's 8. So let me increase this to, say, yeah, 19. And if I do a hot restart, you should see the value is still going to be 19. It's not going to change. So let me bring out the stuff real quick. Okay, we started the application. You can see it still remains at 19. The value didn't change. All right, so now we have done this, but if you look at this, let's say, okay, Okay, so now what we are going to do next is the last part of it. Remember I said I was going to show you how to remove this value to set it back to 0 by default. So let's do that. What I'm going to do, I'll create a button. Okay, so we have a floating action button. So now I would like to create another one. So let me use, should I use a column or a row? Okay, maybe a row will be good. So use a row. So I will create, just duplicate this. So one will be for deleting and one will be for adding. So I will change this stuff to delete. All right. So let me do a hot restart real quick. And we have the two icons, but I don't like how it's positioned. Let's give it some space. Okay, main axis alignment dot space evenly. Okay. All right, so they should fix it. Okay, so now we have the increment counter and the button, but right now this delete button works the same thing as the increment counter. So I'm going to fix that by removing this. So I'll just set it to remove counter. So right now this method does not exist. So we are going to copy this and go up to create it. So I'm going to create another method here. So this is going to be, no. Okay, so this is going to be remove counter, and let's say we have, okay, so I'm also going to initialize this. So just copy this since it's still the same thing. So copy it and put here. So now what are we deleting? We are actually deleting the data from shared preference. Okay, so what I'm going to do, once I delete it, I want to rebuild the widget and then return it immediately back to the default value, which is 0. Okay, so let's say I will do set state. Okay, and I will now call shared preference dot remove. Okay, so it has a method remove. It also has a method of reload. I haven't used this reload before. Let me see. Fetches the latest value from the host platform. Use this method to observe modifications that were made in native code without using the okay. All right, so we are going to remove, and remove just requires one thing, which is the key. So now I'm going to define the key, which is counter key. All right, so let's see. So I'll do a hot restart real quick so that this function will be able to. All right, we still have our value to be 30. All right, so now let me increment it, which is 31. That's what we got there. So if I click on this button, the data is going to reduce. That is going to delete the values. So click on it and let's see. Oops. Okay. Okay, it didn't update. Okay, the reason why it didn't update is because the counter, I didn't actually update the counter as well. So what I'll do is, once I remove, I also want to read. Okay, I also want to read the current value. So I'm going to fix that. But if you do a hot restart now, it should be at 0 because it has already been deleted. It should be at 0. Let's see. Okay, it's on 0 now. But this thing didn't update immediately because what I was meant to do was, immediately I delete it, I also need to fetch the data again. Okay, then re-update the counter to the value. Okay, so I'll just increment this. So now we have it to be 11. Let me do a hot restart and see if we still have 17. Let's see. Okay, performing hot restart. All right, so we still have 17. So what I'm going to do now, this is the method for reading the value, right? So what I'll do, I will copy it. Just copy this stuff alone, or you can even decide to call the function. Okay, you can also decide to call the read counter function instead of copying this stuff. So let me just call the read counter function inside here. Okay, so whenever we delete the data, I want to refetch the data again and then populate the UI. So now let's do this real quick. Okay, save it, and if I click on delete, it should trigger this remove method and then call the read function again. So let me delete it and see. All right, so now it went back to 0 because it checked and saw that this stuff is null, so it assigned it a value of 0. Alright guys, you have seen everything, and this is how you use your shared preference. So this one is basically used for deleting data. Okay, but before I end this video, I know it's getting a little bit long, but please just pardon me. I want to give you another example. What about you want to use this as a string, but you still want to use the same shared preference, but this one you want to use it to store a string. Okay, let's see. Let me say I want to store my name, Destiny Ed. All right, and whenever we update the UI, I want to get that name. So now I'm going to create a string real quick because the name Destiny Ed is going to be a string. So, but at first I want it to be empty. All right, so it won't get any data. So now what I will do now is, okay, so let me say, okay. So I will create another test here that is going to display the name. All right, so I can just remove this, no worries, doesn't matter. So let's just get rid of this, but first let me use this just style and just add it there. Okay, all right, real quick. So I remove this. All right, so I don't want this test, so I will replace this test with my name variable. All right, so if I do a hot restart or if I do save Ctrl S, you should see that test is gone because by default this test is empty. Okay, what about if I added the value? Okay, let's see. It didn't show except I do a hot restart because it's not inside the build method. Okay, let's see. We should have the FFFF there. Okay, so we have the FFF. So what I want to do now, I will set it to the default value of 0. Okay, do a hot restart and let it go. So now I will store my name whenever we click on this button, which is this add button. All right, so I'm going to create it still inside this increment counter function. Basically it's like saving the counter. All right, so I will create another value. So it's going to be preference because I'm still using the same shared preference here. But instead of using the previous one, we use set int, but this one I'll be using set string. Okay, since it's a string I want to set, and the name will be my name, and the value, since I don't have anywhere that I'm getting the name from, you can use a test form feed and then use a controller to get the name whenever the user types it. But in this case, I will be typing the name manually. Okay, Destiny Ed. Okay. Okay. Alright, so Destiny Ed wants you to subscribe. Okay, guys, don't forget to subscribe. So now let's see if I click on this button, this thing is going to save, right? Okay, so let me do a hot restart real quick. It's not going to show, it's going to show empty string there. Alright, so now real quick, let me click on this button. The data is going to save, right? Yes, it's going to save. But right now we won't get that value, which we won't get this Destiny Ed wants this, blah blah blah. We're not going to get it. So now what I'm going to do is to go inside this read counter, because whenever we call this init state, it's going to call the counter. So I'll go to the read counter, still doing this stuff inside the set state, okay, because I want to rebuild the widget. So I will set the name, which is this variable here. So I'm going to set its name. So it's going to be name. Is it name? Okay, name, yeah, equal to. So it's going to be preference, yeah, preference.get string. So I'm going to use that key, which is my name. All right, but what about if this my name is null? Maybe we are opening the app for the first time, so I want to set it to an empty string. All right, okay, so now this should do the work. Yeah, it should do the work. So let me do a hot restart. You will see that this Destiny Ed wants you to subscribe is going to be the test we'll see above this tree. Okay, performing a hot restart, and let's wait for it. Boom, we have it. Destiny Ed wants you to subscribe. So we have the test. Now this test is stored in the shared preference. You can also use this methods to create set bool, set list, set another string, but make sure each and every one of them have a unique key, okay, to identify them. All right, the values can be the same, but the key must be different. How about we want to delete this name? All right, to do that, we can do it. So we use the preferences dot remove, and it's gonna be, what's the name? My name. All right, so that's the key. All right, so let's do a hot restart. Okay, no need for hot restart, just save it. And once you save it, I'm going to click on this delete button, and you should see it will update the widget and everything will be gone. Voila, we have it. But there's also a better way of doing this. Instead of using shared preference or remove key, this one is basically used if you want to delete a specific key. But what about you want to delete everything inside the shared preference without calling the key? You don't even care which data is inside. You just want to clear everything completely. It's just like calling drop in a database. Drop, drop just deletes all your data. Especially in MongoDB, it just deletes all your data. But in this case, how do we do that? There's a method. So I'll comment this real quick. So, but for now, let's see. I'm going to increment this and add some tests. Okay, just increment it. Okay, and do a hot restart to get that stuff. Okay, let's see. All right, so we have this. Ed wants you to subscribe. All right, if we do a hot restart, it's still there. So there's a better way of deleting this. We just want to delete the two things together. So I'll use the preference, which is the name of the shared preference. So use the preference dot clear. So it has a method. So this one completes with true once the user preference for the app has been cleared. All right. So once I do this, I don't have to worry about calling the key or the other stuff. So once I click this, everything will be deleted, and then we refresh the data automatically. What happened there? I deleted you. Okay, let me do a hot restart and see if the datas are gone. Okay, let me click on it again to see if it will go out. Alright, so now the clear works. So the data has been deleted. Alright guys, so this is what I wanted you to know about, is basically how to use the shared preference. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to be looking at something amazing. Alright, but maybe it's best I keep you guys on suspense, but it's going to be something amazing. You're going to love it. So just stay in touch and make sure you check my channel, share this video if you love it, and please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, please click on the dislike button twice, twice, and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.